The Arizona territory stretched before him like a canvas painted in rust and despair. Silas Boone squinted against the merciless sun, his weathered hands gripping the reins as his wagon creaked along the dusty trail toward Yuma. The year was 1873, and the desert had already claimed more souls than the war that ended 8 years prior. Red dust clung to everything: his clothes, his skin, even the letter folded carefully in his vest pocket. The letter. He'd read it a dozen times since receiving it 3 days ago, each reading making less sense than the last. The matrimonial agency in St. Louis had promised him a bride, a woman of good character seeking a new life in the territories. He'd sent his fee, a photograph, and an honest account of his circumstances. Widower, 34 years of age, owner of a modest horse ranch near the New Mexico border. What he hadn't expected was the response from the territorial marshal's office. Your contracted bride will arrive via prison transport on the 15th day of September. Please present yourself at the depot with proper identification. Prison transport. The words had knocked the wind from him harder than any horse ever had. Silas pulled his hat lower, shading his eyes from the afternoon glare. The landscape here was unforgiving. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the horizon, their arms raised in permanent surrender to the heat. Mesquite and Palo Verde dotted the valleys between ancient rock formations that looked like God's own rubble pile. This was country that didn't tolerate weakness, didn't forgive mistakes. It had taught him that lesson well enough when Mary died. The depot came into view as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of copper and blood. Yuma Territorial Prison loomed nearby, its guard towers dark against the burning sky. Silas had passed through this town only twice before, both times hurrying to complete his business and leave. Places like this had a way of holding on to a man's sins, real or imagined. He tied his horses to the post outside the marshal's office, his boots raising small clouds of dust with each step. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of sweat. A deputy looked up from his desk, taking in Silas's appearance with the practiced assessment of a lawman. "You Boone?" the deputy asked, shuffling through papers. "I am. Train's running late. Dust storm near Tucson. Should be here within the hour." The deputy found what he was looking for and slid a document across the desk. "Need you to sign this. Says you're taking custody of prisoner number 314. Female, aged approximately 22 years. Convicted of sedition and conspiracy against the territorial government." Silas stared at the paper. "There's been a mistake. I contracted for a bride through the St. Louis agency. No mistake." The deputy's voice was flat, bored. "New program. Governor's initiative. These women, they'd rot in prison otherwise. This way, they get a chance at redemption through honest marriage and labor. You get a wife. Territory saves money. Everybody wins." The words tasted like sand in Silas's mouth. "And if I refuse, then she serves her full sentence. 15 years hard labor, and you're out the fee you already paid." The deputy pushed an inkwell forward. "Your choice, Boone, but that train's coming whether you sign or not." Silas thought of his empty house, the silence that pressed against him each night like a physical weight. He thought of Mary's grave on the hill behind the ranch, marked with stones he'd gathered from the creek bed. He'd been alone for 3 years now, long enough for the loneliness to settle into his bones like rheumatism. He signed the paper. The train arrived as the last light was fading from the sky, its whistle a mournful cry across the desert. Silas stood on the platform, watching as regular passengers disembarked first, merchants, travelers, a family with small children who gave the last car a wide berth. Then came the guards, rifles held at the ready, and behind them. She looked nothing like the bride he'd imagined during those long nights alone. Her hair, which might have once been the color of honey, hung in matted tangles around a face marked by sun and hardship. Shackles bound her wrists and ankles, the chains clanking with each shuffled step. Her dress, if the shapeless gray garment could be called such, was torn at the hem and stained with God knew what. But it was her eyes that struck him most forcefully. They were green as bottle glass, and they burned with a fury that made him take an involuntary step backward. "Prisoner 314, the lead guard announced, consulting his ledger. "Calla, no last name given." "You Boone?" Silas nodded, unable to find his voice. "She's all yours. Then, word of advice. Watch this one. She's got fight in her still." The guard produced a key and began unlocking her shackles, starting with her ankles. "Tried to bite Thompson last week. Near about took his finger clean off." Calla stood perfectly still as the shackles fell away, her gaze never leaving Silas's face. Up close, he could see the bruises along her arms, the healing cut on her lower lip. When the guard moved to unlock her wrists, she held them out with a defiance that was almost regal. "She don't talk much," the guard added, pocketing the chains. "Least not in any language fit for decent folk. You want my opinion, you'd be better off—" "I didn't ask for your opinion," Silas said quietly. The guard shrugged and turned to leave, then paused. "Receipt," he said, handing Silas another paper. "For your property." Property. The word hung in the air between them as the guards retreated to the train. Silas looked at the woman, Calla, standing there in the gathering darkness. She hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but every line of her body spoke of coiled tension, like a wildcat deciding whether to fight or flee. "My wagon's this way," he said finally. She followed him without a word, her bare feet silent on the wooden platform. He noticed she walked with a slight limp, favoring her left side. At the wagon. He stopped, uncertain. Should he help her up? Offer his hand? The normal courtesies seemed absurd given the circumstances. Calla solved the problem by grasping the wagon's side and hauling herself up with surprising strength, settling on the bench beside him with her hands folded in her lap. The space between them felt charged, electric with unspoken questions and fears. Silas clicked his tongue, and the horses started forward, eager to be away from the noise and stench of the town. They rode in complete silence as Yuma fell behind them and the desert night closed in. The stars emerged one by one, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by another, then another, until the night was alive with their chorus. It was Calla who finally broke the silence. "You going to kill me out here?" Her voice was hoarse, as if she hadn't used it in a long time, but there was no fear in it, only a weary kind of curiosity. The question startled him so badly he nearly dropped the reins. "What? No. God, no. Why would you—" "Man pays for a woman from prison, takes her out into the desert alone." She shrugged, the chains gone but the gesture still restricted. "Careful. Wouldn't be the first time. I'm taking you to my ranch. It's about a day's ride from here. You'll be—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Safe? Free? His wife? You'll be treated decent, I give you my word." She made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Your word." She turned to study him then, those green eyes taking in every detail. "You really don't know what you bought, do you?" "I didn't buy anything," he said sharply. "I contracted for a marriage. This arrangement, it wasn't—" "I didn't know about the prison program, but you signed anyway." He had no answer for that. They stopped near midnight to rest the horses and make camp. Silas built a small fire while Calla sat on a rock, watching him with that unnerving intensity. He offered her water from his canteen, hardtack and dried beef from his supplies. She ate mechanically, efficiently, like someone who'd learned not to count on regular meals. "How long were you in there?" he asked as the fire crackled between them. 8 months. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. In the firelight, she looked younger, more vulnerable. Would have been 15 years if not for the governor's brilliant idea. "What did you do?" Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Existed while female and poor. Made the mistake of keeping company with men who thought the territory's tax collectors were getting too greedy. When they couldn't catch the men, they settled for their women." Silas absorbed this, remembering the tax revolts that had plagued the territory 2 years back. He'd kept his head down, paid what was demanded, survived. But for those without land or livestock to leverage, "I'm sorry," he said. "For what? You didn't put me there." "No, but He trailed off, unsure how to articulate the guilt that was settling in his chest like stones. They reached the ranch late the following day, the sun dropping toward the horizon as the small collection of buildings came into view. It wasn't much, a main house of adobe and timber, a barn, corrals for the horses, a well. But Silas had built it with his own hands, and in the dying light. It looked almost welcoming. "This is it," he said unnecessarily. Calla surveyed the property with those sharp eyes, taking in every detail. "No neighbors? Nearest ranch is 8 miles north. Town's a day's ride east." She nodded slowly. "Good." He helped her down from the wagon this time, his hands careful on her waist. She was lighter than he'd expected, her body all sharp angles beneath the shapeless dress. Inside the house, he lit lanterns, illuminating the sparse but clean interior. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, a place for everything and everything in its place. The habit of a man living alone. "You can have the bedroom," he said, gesturing to the door at the back. "I'll take the barn loft." She stood in the middle of the main room, arms wrapped around herself, looking lost for the first time since he'd seen her on that platform. What do you expect from me?" The question hung between them, heavy with implication. What did he expect? A wife, a companion, someone to fill the silence that pressed against him each night? "Nothing," he said finally. "Not tonight. Not until—" He ran a hand through his hair, suddenly exhausted. "We'll figure it out as we go. For now, just rest. There's water in the pitcher, and I'll leave some clean clothes outside the door. They were my wife's. Might be a bit big, but they're better than what you're wearing." At the mention of his wife, something shifted in Calla's expression. "She died. 3 years ago. Fever." "I'm sorry." It was his turn to echo her earlier words. "You didn't kill her." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "The lock works from the inside," he said without looking back, "in case you were wondering." Behind him, he heard her move to the door, heard the soft click of the lock sliding home. Only then did he allow himself to breathe, really breathe, for the first time since seeing her on that platform, in the barn. He lay in the hay and stared at the stars through the gaps in the roof. From the house, he could see the soft glow of lamplight in the bedroom window. She was probably searching the room, looking for weapons, escape routes, any sign of what he might really want from her. He didn't blame her. What had he done? The question circled his mind like a buzzard. He'd wanted a wife, yes, but not like this. Not someone who looked at him with those hard green eyes and asked if he meant to kill her. Not someone who came to him in chains. But she was here now. And he'd signed his name to her freedom. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, the work of the ranch, the suspicious eyes of any neighbors who might visit, the careful dance of 2 damaged people trying to find common ground. For tonight, though, he listened to the horses nickering softly in their stalls, the distant yip of coyotes, and wondered if somewhere in that locked room, Calla was lying awake too, listening to the same night sounds and wondering what kind of prison she'd traded for another. The morning came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of their situation. Silas woke to the sound of movement in the house, careful footsteps, the scrape of a chair. He dressed quickly and crossed the yard, pausing at the door before knocking softly. "I'm making breakfast," he called. "Coffee's on." The door opened a crack, and Calla peered out. She'd changed into Mary's dress, a simple blue calico that hung loose on her thinner frame. Her hair was still tangled, but she'd washed her face, revealing the true extent of the bruising along her jaw. "I don't know how to cook," she said abruptly. "That's all right. I've been managing on my own." He moved to the stove, aware of her watching his every movement. "But if you want to learn, I can teach you." She settled at the table, her posture rigid. In the morning light streaming through the window, he could see the marks on her wrists where the shackles had rubbed raw. Without thinking, he reached for the tin of salve on the shelf. "For your wrists," he said, setting it before her. She stared at it for a long moment before opening the tin and applying the salve with careful fingers. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the sizzle of bacon in the pan. "What am I supposed to do here?" she asked finally. "Whatever needs doing. Feed the chickens, gather eggs, help with the horses if you're inclined. Garden needs attention." "I haven't had time." He plated the food and set it before her. "But nothing you don't want to do. And if I don't want to do anything," he met her challenging gaze steadily. "Then you don't." She seemed taken aback by this, as if she'd expected threats or demands. They ate in silence, but Silas noticed she cleaned her plate, eating with the same mechanical efficiency as the night before. After breakfast, he showed her around the property, the chicken coop, where a dozen hens pecked and scratched, the vegetable garden, withered from neglect, the well, with its rope and bucket, the barn, where 8 horses stood in their stalls, ears pricked with curiosity at the stranger. "They're beautiful," Calla said softly, the first genuine emotion he'd heard from her. "Quarter horses, mostly. Good for working cattle, though I mainly breed and train them for sale." He watched as she approached the nearest stall, where a bay mare stretched her neck out cautiously. "That's Dulcie. She's gentle." Calla extended her hand slowly, letting the horse lip at her palm. For a moment, her face softened, the hard edges smoothing into something almost peaceful. Then, as if remembering herself, she stepped back. "I'll feed the chickens," she said brusquely. The days fell into an uneasy rhythm. Calla worked without being asked, throwing herself into tasks with a fierce determination that spoke of someone used to earning their keep. She fed the chickens, gathered eggs, hauled water from the well. When Silas tried to help, she waved him off with sharp gestures. "I'm not helpless," she'd say, and he'd retreat, understanding that work was her way of maintaining some control. On the 4th day, they had their first visitor. Silas was in the corral working with a young stallion when he heard the approaching wagon. His stomach tightened as he recognized Tom Garrett from the neighboring ranch, accompanied by his wife, Martha, a woman whose tongue was sharper than any spur. "Boone," Tom called out, his voice carrying that false friendliness that meant trouble. "Heard you took yourself a wife." Calla emerged from the chicken coop, egg basket in hand, and froze. Martha Garrett's eyes swept over her like a cold wind, taking in the ill-fitting dress, the healing bruises, the defensive posture. "This her?" Martha asked, not bothering to address Calla directly. "The convict?" The word hung in the air like a curse. Silas saw Calla's knuckles whiten on the basket handle. "This is my wife, Calla," he said evenly. "Calla, these are the Garretts. They have the spread north of here. Wife." Martha's laugh was like breaking glass. "That what they're calling it? I heard she was a—" She paused, savoring the moment. "A woman of ill repute, among other things." Calla set the basket down very carefully. When she spoke, her voice was steady as stone. "And what did you hear about the men who visited those women? Or do we only count the sins of those who needed coins to eat?" Martha's face flushed red. "How dare you?" "Martha," Tom's warning came too late. "No, Tom, I won't be silent. It's indecent, bringing a creature like this among respectable people. And you, Silas Boone, parading your shame for all to see. Get off my land." Silas's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made Tom step back. "Now, you'll regret this, Boone." Martha spat as her husband helped her into the wagon. "Mark my words, that woman will bring nothing but trouble to this valley." After they left, Silas found Calla behind the barn, her whole body shaking. Not with tears, he realized, but rage. "I won't be the reason you lose your neighbors," she said through clenched teeth. "Those aren't neighbors worth having. You don't understand. People like her, they'll make your life miserable. They'll turn others against you, refuse to do business. Let them." He leaned against the barn wall beside her. "I've been alone 3 years. I can manage a few more." She turned to study him, those green eyes searching, Why are you doing this? He thought about it, really thought about it. Maybe because I know what it's like to be judged for things beyond your control. Maybe because I signed that paper and I keep my word. Or maybe, he paused, then spoke the truth. Maybe because I'm tired of being alone, and even angry company is better than none. That startled a laugh out of her, short and bitter, but real. You might regret that opinion. The next morning, Silas woke to find Calla already working in the neglected garden plot, attacking the weeds with vicious determination. By the time he joined her, she'd cleared a significant patch. "Thought I might try to salvage what's left," she said without looking up. "If you don't mind. It's your garden as much as mine now." She paused at that, her hands stilling in the dirt. "Nothing's mine. Let's not pretend otherwise. The law says I'm property transferred from the territory to you." She sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her brow. "Just because the chains are gone doesn't mean I'm free." He wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. Instead, he knelt beside her and began pulling weeds. They worked in silence until the sun grew too hot, their hands dark with soil. That evening at supper, Calla spoke about her past for the first time without prompting. "I wasn't born to that life," she said quietly, staring at her plate. "My father was a minister, died when I was 12, along with my mother. Typhoid. I tried to find honest work, but a girl alone in the territories." She shrugged. "You do what you must to survive. How did you end up in prison?" Her jaw tightened. "There was a man, Samuel Morrison, led a group opposing the territorial taxes. He was kind to me, treated me like a person instead of a commodity. When the authorities came for him, they found me in his rooms." Her laugh was bitter. "Didn't matter that I knew nothing of his plans. A fallen woman in a rebel's bed? Guilty by association. Morrison, I remember reading about him. They hanged him, didn't they? Along with 6 others. She pushed her food around her plate. "The women they sent to prison. 15 years hard labor for the crime of being desperate enough to take comfort where we found it." That night, Silas heard her crying, muffled sounds through the thin walls that she tried to muffle in her pillow. He lay in his own bed, fists clenched, wanting to go to her but knowing his presence would be no comfort. What comfort could he offer? He was just another man who'd taken possession of her, even if his intentions were different. The following days brought a parade of curious neighbors, each finding some excuse to visit. Most were less openly hostile than Martha Garrett, but no less judgmental. The women whispered behind their hands while the men stared openly, their gazes lingering too long on Calla's figure. Through it all, Calla maintained a rigid dignity, answering their veiled insults with a steady gaze and silence. But Silas saw the toll it took, the way her hands trembled after each visit, the deeper shadows under her eyes. One afternoon, while Silas was in town for supplies, a group of young men from neighboring ranches rode up to the house. Calla was in the garden when she heard their approach, and something in their drunken laughter made her blood run cold. "Well, well," the leader drawled. The convict bride, all alone. She stood slowly, the hoe gripped tight in her hands. "State your business or leave." "Our business?" Another laughed. "Just wanted to see what kind of woman Boone bought himself. Heard you were quite popular back in your working days." "Bet she's missing it," a third added. "All those visitors. Must get awful lonely out here with just one man." They dismounted, moving to surround her with the casual confidence of men who'd never been told no. Calla's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "My husband will be back soon. Not soon enough." The leader reached for her, and Calla swung the hoe with all her strength. It connected with his shoulder, sending him staggering back with a curse. The others lunged forward, but the sound of hoofbeats made them pause. Silas rode into the yard at full gallop, his rifle already in hand. His face, usually so controlled, was dark with fury. "Get off my land," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "And if any of you come near my wife again, they'll be picking lead out of your hides for a month." The men retreated, hurling threats and crude suggestions as they went. Silas dismounted and went straight to Calla, his hands hovering near her shoulders, not quite touching. "Did they hurt you?" She shook her head, still gripping the hoe. "I've dealt with worse. You shouldn't have to deal with any of it." His voice cracked with emotion. "This is my fault. Bringing you here, exposing you to—" "Stop!" She dropped the hoe and grabbed his hands, surprising them both. "You didn't create their ugliness. You stood against it. That's more than anyone's done for me in a very long time." They stood there in the garden, hands clasped, as the dust from the rider's departure settled around them. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was understanding. And for two people so accustomed to isolation, it was enough. That night, Calla didn't lock her door. When Silas knocked to call her for supper, she opened it wide and met his eyes without flinching. "Teach me to shoot," she said. He nodded without hesitation. "Tomorrow morning." As they sat down to their simple meal, the space between them felt different. Not comfortable, exactly, but less charged with fear and suspicion. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon, promising rain for the thirsty land. Inside, two damaged souls shared bread and silence, and for the first time since that night on the platform, both dared to think that perhaps they weren't entirely alone. The rifle felt foreign in Calla's hands, heavier than she'd expected. Silas stood behind her in the early morning light, patient as always, adjusting her stance. "Shoulder tight against the stock," he said quietly. "Breathe out slowly. Squeeze, don't pull." The target, a tin can balanced on a fence post, seemed impossibly far away. Calla fired, the recoil jolting through her body. The can remained mockingly still. "Again," Silas said. "By the 10th shot." She clipped the can's edge. By the 20th, she sent it spinning. When she lowered the rifle, her shoulder ached, but her eyes were bright with something Silas hadn't seen before, pride. "You're a quick study," he said, taking the rifle to reload. "Had to be." She rubbed her shoulder. "Quick learners live longer." Over the following weeks, Calla transformed before his eyes. The defensive hunch of her shoulders gradually straightened. She learned to handle the rifle with growing confidence, to saddle and ride the gentler horses, to read the sky for signs of weather. The garden began to flourish under her care. Neat rows of beans and squash emerging from soil she'd claimed from the desert. One evening, Silas found her with Dulcie, the bay mare, running a brush along the horse's flank with practiced strokes. She was humming, barely audible, a half-remembered hymn from childhood perhaps, and didn't notice his approach. "You have a way with them," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. She paused, but didn't tense as she once would have. "Horses are honest. They don't pretend kindness while calculating your worth. Most people aren't calculating anything, Calla. They're just afraid of what they don't understand. Fear makes people cruel." She resumed brushing, long, steady strokes. "I've seen what fear does, felt it." He moved to the next stall, beginning to brush the black gelding there. They worked in companionable silence, the barn filling with the peaceful sounds of horses and evening crickets. "Tell me about her," Calla said suddenly. "Your wife, Mary." Silas's hand stilled. He rarely spoke of Mary, keeping those memories locked away like treasures too precious to expose to daylight. But something in Calla's tone, not demanding, just gently curious, loosened his tongue. "She was nothing like you," he began, then winced. "That came out wrong. No offense taken. Go on." "Mary was soft, gentle, came from a good family back east. Followed her father out here when he took up ranching. We met at a church social." He smiled at the memory. "She was wearing a yellow dress, laughing at something her sister said. Looked like sunshine in the middle of all that dust and leather. You loved her from the first moment." He resumed brushing, needing the motion. "Courted her proper for a year before her father agreed to the marriage. We had 3 good years before the fever took her." "Tell me about the fever." He closed his eyes, remembering. Started as just tiredness, then the shaking, the burning up. "I rode for the doctor, but he was treating an outbreak in Tucson. By the time he came, his voice caught. She died in my arms during a sandstorm, wind howling so loud I couldn't hear her last words. Calla had stopped brushing, her attention fully on him. You blame yourself. I should have taken her somewhere else. California, maybe somewhere with real doctors. Clean water. Stop. Her voice was firm. I spent months in that prison listening to women torture themselves with should-haves. Should have chosen better men. Should have found respectable work. Should have been born to money. She shook her head. All it does is eat you alive from the inside. Speaking from experience, every damn day. She returned to brushing Dulcie. But I'm trying to do better. Can't change what was, can only work with what is. That night, the promised storm finally arrived. It started as a whisper of wind, building gradually to a howl that set the windows rattling. Then came the sand, a wall of it, turning day to night in moments. Calla was in the garden when it hit, trying to cover the tender plants. The wind caught her skirts, nearly knocking her down. Silas saw her from the window and rushed out, grabbing her arm. "Leave it!" he shouted over the wind. "Get inside!" They stumbled through the door together as the full force of the storm struck. The house groaned under the assault, sand filtering through every crack and crevice. Silas rushed to secure the shutters while Calla stuffed rags under the doors. "The horses," she started. "They're in the barn. They'll be fine." He had to raise his voice over the wind's shriek. This could last hours. They huddled in the main room, a single lamp providing flickering light. The storm raged outside, turning the windows opaque with driven sand. Despite the circumstances, or perhaps because of them, the atmosphere felt almost cozy. Two people sheltering together against nature's fury. "I hated these storms in prison," Calla said quietly. "Locked in cells, sand everywhere, no way to escape. Some women went mad during the bad ones." Were there many bad storms? Enough. She pulled her knees to her chest. But the worst was the silence after. When the wind died and you could hear everyone crying, coughing up dust, praying to die. Without thinking, Silas moved closer on the bench, not touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "You survived." "Sometimes I wonder if I did." Her voice was barely audible. "Or if I'm just a ghost pretending to be alive." "Ghosts don't make gardens grow, don't gentle horses or stand up to drunken fools with a hoe." That drew a small smile from her. "I suppose not." The lamp flickered as a particularly violent gust shook the house. In the unstable light, Silas saw her trembling, not from cold but from memory. This time, he did touch her, just a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. She tensed for a heartbeat, then leaned into him, just slightly. "I dream about it sometimes," she whispered. "The cell, the chains. I wake up certain I'm still there, that this is all some fever dream." "What convinces you it's real?" She thought about it. "The quiet. Mostly, you don't realize how loud a prison is until you're out. All those women packed together. No privacy, no peace." She paused. "And the smell of sage in the morning, coffee brewing, your boots on the porch when you think I'm still asleep. You hear that?" "I hear everything. Old habit." She shifted slightly, her shoulder pressing more firmly against his side. "I know you check on me, stand outside the door sometimes, just listening." He felt heat rise in his face. "I worry that something might happen, that I might run, that you might hurt yourself." The admission came hard. "Some mornings you look so lost, like you're drowning in broad daylight." She was quiet for a long moment. "Some mornings I am drowning, but then there's work to do. Horses to tend, plants to water. Can't drown when there's work." The storm's intensity peaked, the whole house shuddering. Instinctively, they pressed closer together, two small beings in the face of nature's rage. Silas felt her trembling increase and, without conscious decision, wrapped his arm around her shoulders. She went rigid, and he started to pull away, but her hand caught his wrist. "Don't," she said. "Just don't move. Let me get used to it." They sat frozen like that, his arm around her, her fingers on his wrist, as the storm battered the walls. Gradually, incrementally, she relaxed against him. Her head tipped sideways until it rested on his shoulder, and he felt her breathing slow. "I wasn't always afraid of touch," she said into the semi-darkness. "There was a time when I craved it, a kind word, a gentle hand. But then touch became transaction, currency, something to endure. It doesn't have to be that way." "I know, my head knows, but my body remembers." She turned slightly, looking up at him. "You're a patient man, Silas Boone. I've got nothing but time." The wind began to die as suddenly as it had risen. The house still groaned occasionally, settling after its battering, but the worst had passed. Neither of them moved, held in place by something more fragile than the storm, but just as powerful. "Calla," he said softly, "what you said about being a ghost. You're the most alive person I've met in 3 years. Fierce and stubborn and so damn determined to survive. You make me remember what it feels like to be alive, too." She lifted her head from his shoulder, studying his face in the dim light. Then, so quickly he almost missed it, she pressed her lips to his cheek, barely a touch, like a butterfly landing, before standing and moving away. "I should check the damage to the garden," she said, not looking at him. "Calla, thank you." The words were soft but clear. "For the shelter, for being patient." She slipped out into the settling dust, leaving Silas sitting in the lamplight, his hand touching the spot where her lips had been. Through the window, he watched her moving through her ruined garden, already planning its resurrection. That night, neither of them spoke of what had passed between them during the storm, but at dinner, their hands brushed as they reached for the water pitcher, and neither pulled away. When Calla bid him good night, she met his eyes fully, and he saw something new there, not trust, not yet, but the possibility of it, later, lying in his bed. Silas listened to her moving about in the next room, not pacing as she sometimes did, but calm movements, the rustle of covers, the creak of the bed frame as she settled. For the first time since she'd arrived, he didn't hear her crying in the night. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of creosote. Tomorrow would bring the work of repair, of salvaging what could be saved and replanting what was lost. But tonight, in the quiet aftermath, 2 wounded souls had found a moment of peace in each other's presence. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning. The town of Perdition lay a day's ride east, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the desert wind. Silas had avoided it since bringing Calla home, having supplies delivered when possible, but the damaged storm shutters needed proper hinges, and the garden required new seeds. "I'll go with you," Calla announced over breakfast. Silas paused, coffee cup halfway to his lips. "You don't have to. I know the town isn't welcoming. All the more reason to go." Her jaw set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. "I won't hide forever." They set out early, the wagon loaded with items for trade. Calla wore her best dress, another of Mary's, taken in to fit her properly, and had pinned her hair up in a respectable style. But no amount of propriety could hide the wariness in her eyes or the defensive set of her shoulders. The town was busy, Saturday bringing ranchers and farmers from miles around. Heads turned as their wagon rolled down Main Street, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Silas felt Calla stiffen beside him, but she kept her chin high, gaze fixed straight ahead. At the general store, Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor's wife, looked them up and down with barely concealed distaste. "Silas," she said coolly, then let her eyes slide over Calla as if she weren't there. "Mrs. Henderson, we need hinges and garden seeds." He helped Calla down from the wagon, keeping his hand on her elbow. "My wife will select what we need for the garden." The word wife hung in the air like a challenge. Mrs. Henderson's mouth pursed as if she'd tasted something sour, but she gestured toward the seed display. Calla moved through the store with quiet dignity, selecting seeds, examining tools, ignoring the whispers that followed her. Silas watched her from the corner of his eye while discussing hinges with Mr. Henderson, ready to intervene if needed. He was paying for their purchases when trouble arrived in the form of Deputy Marshal Frank Morrison, a thick-necked man with cruel eyes and a badge he wore like a crown. Silas recognized the type. Small men made smaller by the weight of authority they couldn't handle. Well, Morrison drawled, blocking Calla's path to the door. Prisoner 314. Surprised to see you walking free. She's not a prisoner, Silas said quietly. She's my wife. Morrison's laugh was ugly. Wife, that's rich. He stepped closer to Calla, who stood perfectly still, her knuckles white on the seed packets. I remember you from Yuma. Caused quite a stir in the men's wing, all that howling at night. What was it you used to scream? Please, no more. The store went silent. Calla's face had gone pale, but her voice was steady when she spoke. I remember you too, Deputy Morrison. Remember how you used to volunteer for night duty? How you liked to watch? Morrison's face darkened. Watch your tongue, or you'll find yourself back in chains. On what charges? Silas moved between them, his hand drifting to his sidearm. She's served her sentence. She's a free woman. Free. Morrison spat the word. A bought woman ain't free. Boone. And this one's got debts that ain't paid just 'cause you signed some paper. What debts? Calla asked, though something in her expression suggested she already knew. Morrison's smile was predatory. Services rendered and not paid for. Men you left, unsatisfied when you got yourself arrested. They've been asking after you. Silas saw red. His fist connected with Morrison's jaw before he'd made the conscious decision to swing, sending the deputy staggering into a display of canned goods. The crash was tremendous, tins rolling across the floor as Morrison went down. Silas! No! Calla grabbed his arm as he moved forward. He's not worth it. Morrison struggled to his feet, blood streaming from his nose. You just assaulted a lawman. Boone, that's prison time. And you just admitted to procurement and allowing prisoner abuse. Silas said coldly, Want to take this to the territorial judge? I'm sure he'd be interested in your night duty activities. The two men stared at each other, the threat hanging between them. Finally, Morrison wiped the blood from his face and straightened his badge. This isn't over, he snarled. You can't protect her forever. Boone, and when you can't... He looked at Calla with naked hatred. I'll be waiting. He stalked out, leaving chaos in his wake. The store patrons stared at Silas and Calla with expressions ranging from shock to disgust to a grudging respect. Mrs. Henderson was pale behind her counter. I'll add the damages to your bill, she said faintly. No need. Mr. Henderson said firmly, speaking for the first time. Morrison's been asking for that for years. No charge for the entertainment. Outside, Calla was shaking. Not with fear, Silas realized, but rage. She climbed into the wagon and sat rigid as he loaded their purchases. You shouldn't have done that, she said as they drove out of town. He had no right to speak to you that way. Men like him don't need rights. They take what they want. Her voice was bitter. And now he'll make trouble for you, for us. Let him try. She turned to look at him fully. You don't understand. Men like Morrison, they don't fight fair. They come at night, with friends. When you're not ready, I've seen what they do. Silas pulled the wagon to a stop on a rise overlooking the valley. In the distance, their ranch was a small collection of buildings against the vast landscape. Home. See that? He said, pointing. That's ours. Built it with my own hands. Buried my wife on that hill. Nearly lost it twice to drought and debt. But it's still standing, and as long as it stands, you have a place. Morrison and all his kind can go to hell? Calla stared at the distant buildings, her expression unreadable. Why do you care so much? You barely know me. I know enough. He clicked the reins, starting the horses forward again. I know you're stronger than anyone gives you credit for. I know you work harder than any hand I could hire. I know you treat the animals with kindness and respect. He paused. And I know you've been hurt enough for one lifetime." She was quiet for a long moment. "The things Morrison said about the prison, they're true. The guards, they—" She stopped, unable to continue. "You don't have to tell me, but you should know what kind of woman you've tied yourself to. I know exactly who you are." His voice was firm. "You're Calla Boone. The rest is past." That night, Calla couldn't sleep. The confrontation with Morrison had awakened old terrors, and every sound outside made her heart race. Finally, she gave up and made her way to the kitchen, intending to make tea. Silas was already there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and his rifle within reach. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. "Figured Morrison might try something tonight. Wanted to be ready." She poured herself tea and sat across from him. "This is what I've brought to your life. Sleepless nights and loaded guns. I've had plenty of both before you came." He studied her over his cup. "Stop trying to make me regret this. Calla, it won't work. Even if Morrison comes, even if he brings others, even then—" She shook her head. "I don't understand you. Most men would have sent me back after today, or at least demanded compensation for the trouble. I'm not most men." "No," she said softly. "You're not." They sat in companionable silence, watching the windows for signs of trouble that didn't come. As dawn began to lighten the sky, Calla stood and moved to the stove. "I'll make breakfast," she said. "Might as well start the day." As she worked, Silas watched her, the efficient movements, the straight line of her back, the way the early light caught in her hair. She'd changed in the weeks since her arrival, grown stronger, more confident, but there was still a brittleness to her, like glass that had been heated and cooled too many times. "Calla," he said suddenly. "That night, during the storm, when you kissed my cheek—" She stilled, her back to him. "I shouldn't have. It was presumptuous." "No, it was—" He searched for words. "It was the first time since Mary died that I felt human, not just existing, but alive." She turned slowly, meeting his eyes. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't make this into something it's not. I'm grateful to you, Silas, more than I can say, but gratitude isn't love. I'm not asking for love. I'm not asking for anything." He stood, moving closer but maintaining distance. "I'm just telling you that you matter, that what happens to you matters to me." Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't know how to do this, how to be a wife, how to care for someone who doesn't want to hurt me. I'm broken. Silas, all the important parts of me are in pieces." "Then we'll gather the pieces," he said simply. "However long it takes." A single tear escaped, rolling down her cheek. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed it away with his thumb. She caught his hand, holding it against her face, and for a moment they stood frozen in the morning light. Then hoofbeats sounded in the distance, breaking the spell. Both tensed, Silas reaching for his rifle, but it was only Tom Garrett, riding alone. "Boone," he called from the gate. "Heard there was trouble in town. Came to see if you needed a hand." Silas exchanged glances with Calla. Surprised, they walked out together to meet him. "Tom," Silas said carefully. "Didn't expect to see you." Tom dismounted, hat in hand. "I owe you folks an apology. My Martha, she had no right to speak as she did. And what Morrison pulled yesterday." He shook his head. "Man's been a plague on this territory for too long. About time someone knocked him down." He turned to Calla. "Ma'am, I'd be honored if you'd accept my apology. You've done nothing but try to make a life here, and that deserves respect." Calla studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Garrett. My friends are organizing." Tom continued. "If Morrison tries anything, he'll find more than one household ready to stand against him. Nobody threatens peaceful folks, regardless of their past." After Tom left, Calla stood staring at the dust of his departure. He called me ma'am, she said wonderingly. You are a lady, Silas said. About time people recognized it. She turned to him with an expression he'd never seen before, soft and vulnerable and achingly hopeful. Silas Boone, she said quietly. You might just be the death of me. How's that? You're making me believe things might actually get better. She touched his arm lightly. That's a dangerous thing for someone like me to believe. He covered her hand with his. Then I'll just have to make sure it's true. Standing there in the morning sun, hands linked, they both felt the shift, subtle but undeniable. Not love, not yet, but something growing between them like the seeds in Calla's garden. Something that might, with patience and care, bloom into something beautiful. The change came gradually, like spring water seeping through limestone. Days passed without incident after the confrontation with Morrison, and slowly, carefully, Calla began to unfurl. She smiled more often, small, tentative things that transformed her face. She hummed while working in the garden, old hymns remembered from childhood, and sometimes, when Silas caught her looking at him, there was warmth in her green eyes instead of wariness. One evening, she surprised him by joining him on the porch after supper instead of retreating to her room. The sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, and the air carried the scent of sage and her thriving garden. I've been thinking, she said, settling onto the bench beside him. About what Tom Garrett said, about people standing together. What about it? Maybe I've been wrong to hide. Maybe facing them down is better than letting fear rule me. She paused, fingers twisting in her lap. There's a church social next week. Would you... That is, do you think we should go? Silas kept his expression neutral, though his heart jumped. If you want to, I'll be right beside you. Together. Then... She nodded as if settling something with herself. Yes, we'll go together. The night before the social, Calla stood before the mirror in her room, holding up one of Mary's dresses. Silas found her there, frowning at her reflection. It doesn't suit me, she said. Your wife had softer coloring. This yellow makes me look sallow. There's a trunk in the attic, he said hesitantly. More of Mary's things. Might be something that suits better. Together they climbed to the dusty attic space. The trunk sat in a corner, undisturbed for 3 years. Silas's hands trembled slightly as he opened it, breathing in the faint scent of lavender sachets. Are you sure? Calla asked gently. We don't have to. She would have wanted them used. He pulled out dress after dress, laying them over a beam. Mary believed in practical charity, hated waste. Calla fingered a deep green cotton with ivory buttons. This is beautiful. Try it on. When she emerged from behind the makeshift screen, Silas's breath caught. The green brought out her eyes and complemented her sun-touched skin. She'd pinned her hair up, exposing the graceful line of her neck. How do I look? She asked, unusually shy. Beautiful, he said simply. You look beautiful. The church social was held in the meadow behind the small white chapel. Lanterns hung from tree branches, and tables groaned under the weight of covered dishes. The fiddler was already warming up as wagons arrived from all directions. Conversation faltered when Silas helped Calla down from their wagon. She clutched his arm, her fingers digging in slightly, but kept her head high. He could feel the tremor running through her. Steady, he murmured. We belong here as much as anyone. Martha Garrett was holding court near the dessert table, but when she saw them, something unexpected happened. She flushed, whispered urgently to her husband, then turned away. Not warmly, but not with the open hostility of before. The power of a man's fist, Calla muttered. The power of standing up to bullies, Silas corrected. Gradually, tentatively, people approached them. The blacksmith's wife complimented Calla's dress. The schoolteacher asked about her garden, having heard she'd coaxed vegetables from the stubborn soil. Not everyone was friendly. Plenty still gave them wide berth, but it was progress. When the dancing started, Silas held out his hand. "May I?" Calla stared at his extended hand. I never learned properly." "Neither did I. We'll muddle through together." She placed her hand in his, letting him lead her into the circle of dancers. The fiddler played a simple reel, and Silas guided her through the steps, his hand warm on her waist. She was stiff at first, counting steps under her breath, but gradually relaxed into the rhythm. "You're doing fine," he said as they turned. "I'm terrified." She admitted, but she was smiling. They danced 3 more sets before Calla begged for air. Silas fetched cups of cider while she fanned herself on the church steps. When he returned, he found her deep in conversation with an older woman he didn't recognize. "Miracle anything grows in this soil," the woman was saying. "But I heard you got tomatoes already setting fruit. The secret is bone meal." Calla replied, "And talking to them, plants like company." The woman laughed. "I'll try that. Lord knows I'll try anything." She patted Calla's hand before moving away. "You come visit, dear. I'm the widow Martinez, the adobe house past Miller's Creek." She was nice, Calla said wonderingly after she'd gone. "Most people are, given a chance." As the evening wore on, Calla bloomed like her garden flowers. She traded recipes with ranchers' wives, discussed horses with the men, even helped serve cake to the children. Silas watched her from across the meadow, marveling at the transformation. "Your wife seems to be settling in well," a voice said beside him. He turned to find Reverend Davis, the circuit preacher who visited monthly. The man's eyes were kind but knowing. "She is," Silas agreed carefully. "I heard about the circumstances, how she came to be here." The Reverend paused. "I've seen many marriages in my time, Mr. Boone, some born of love, some of necessity, some of convenience. What matters isn't how they begin, but how they're tended." "Like gardens?" "Exactly like gardens." The Reverend smiled. "I'll be back through next month, if you'd like to consecrate your union properly, in the church. I'd be honored to perform the ceremony." Silas looked across at Calla, who was laughing at something the blacksmith's daughter had said. "I'll speak to her about it." On the ride home, Calla was quiet, but it was a different quality of silence than before, contented rather than wary. She leaned against him slightly as the wagon rolled through the darkness. "Thank you," she said softly, "for making me go, for staying close." "You did all the hard work yourself." "No, you gave me courage. Do you know what the widow Martinez told me?" She said, "Any woman who could capture Silas Boone's heart must be special. That man's been locked tighter than a bank vault since poor Mary passed." Silas felt heat rise in his neck. "She said that?" "She did." Calla turned to study his profile in the moonlight. "Have I captured your heart?" He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. "You've done something to it. Not captured, maybe, but awakened, like you've awakened that garden from barren soil." "Silas?" She touched his arm. "I need to tell you something. About the prison. About Morrison and the guards." "You don't have to." "I do. If we're to go forward, you should know." She took a deep breath. "They never completed what they threatened. Morrison liked to torment, to make us afraid. But the warden had rules about damaging the merchandise, as he called us, so they found other ways to be cruel. Watching us bathe, making us beg for food. Psychological tortures that left no marks." "I'm sorry," Silas said. "The word's inadequate. I'm telling you so you understand. Why I flinch. Why some nights I wake screaming. Why sometimes when you look at me too intently, I have to turn away." She paused. "But also so you know that I'm not as broken as I could be. That there's still possibility." They'd reached the ranch. Silas helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal, almost too beautiful to be real. "Calla," he said roughly, "the Reverend offered to marry us properly, in the church." "Only if you want?" She silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I want that. Standing there in the darkness, something shifted between them. Calla rose on her toes and kissed him, not on the cheek this time, but fully on the mouth. It was inexperienced and a little desperate, tasting of apple cider and possibility. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. "Was that all right?" she asked anxiously. "I'm not sure I remember how." He answered by kissing her again, gently, giving her time to pull away if she needed. Instead, she melted against him, her hands clutching his shirt. "We should go inside," she whispered against his mouth. "We should." He agreed, making no move to release her. Finally, laughing shakily, they separated. But at her bedroom door, Calla paused. "Stay," she said softly. Just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight." They lay fully clothed on top of the quilt, a careful space between them. Calla curled on her side, facing him, her hand resting on the bed between them. Silas covered it with his own. "Tell me about tomorrow," she said drowsily. "What needs doing?" He talked quietly about ranch work, horses to train, fences to mend, until her breathing deepened into sleep. Only then did he allow himself to study her face, relaxed and peaceful in the moonlight streaming through the window. She'd asked if she'd captured his heart. The truth was simpler and more complex. She hadn't captured it. She'd given it reason to beat again. Sometime before dawn, Calla shifted in her sleep, closing the space between them. Her head found his shoulder, her arm draped across his chest. Silas lay perfectly still, afraid to wake her, afraid to break this fragile trust she'd given him. When the first light touched the window, Calla stirred. For a moment she tensed, realizing their position, then deliberately relaxed against him. "Good morning," she murmured against his shirt. "Morning." "This is nice," she said softly. "Waking up not alone." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." They rose and went about their morning routines, but everything felt different, charged with promise. Over breakfast, they made plans for the garden expansion, for the new foals expected in spring, for their wedding ceremony. "A real wedding," Calla said wonderingly. "I never thought—" "What kind of dress would you like? We could order from the catalog, or—" "The green one," she said firmly. "The one I wore last night. It brought me luck." That afternoon, while Silas worked with the horses, Calla wrote in the journal he'd given her, the first time she'd used it. Her handwriting was careful, unpracticed but determined. "Today I'm learning to hope again. It terrifies me, but perhaps terror is just another word for being alive. S says we'll marry in the church next month. I want to be the wife he deserves. I want to learn to love without fear. I want to believe I'm allowed to be happy. Perhaps wanting is the first step to having. Perhaps hope is its own kind of courage." As she wrote, a mockingbird perched on the garden fence, filling the air with borrowed songs made somehow sweeter by the sharing. Calla paused to listen, her pen suspended above the page, and smiled. The knock came at midnight, sharp and insistent. Silas woke instantly, reaching for his rifle. Beside him, Calla stirred. They'd taken to sharing a bed since the church social, though nothing beyond sleeping had passed between them. "Stay here," he whispered, but she was already reaching for the pistol he'd taught her to use. Through the window, he could see torches, 5, maybe 6 riders. His heart sank as he recognized Morrison's voice. "Boone, got a warrant here. Open up, or we'll break it down." "What warrant?" Silas called through the door. "For the woman. New evidence in her case. Seems she's wanted for additional crimes back in Tucson." Calla had gone rigid beside him, her face pale in the moonlight. "It's a lie," she whispered. "I've never been to Tucson." "I know." He squeezed her shoulder. "Get dressed, quickly!" While she fumbled with her dress, Silas pulled on his boots and gun belt. His mind raced through options. None of them good. Morrison had brought enough men to make a fight futile. 2 minutes. "Boone!" Morrison shouted. "Then we come in shooting." Silas opened the door. rifle held loosely but ready. Morrison sat his horse like a conquering general, warrant paper held high. Behind him, 5 deputized thugs waited with eager expressions. "Let me see that warrant," Silas demanded. Morrison tossed it down. Even in the torchlight, Silas could see it was official, signed by a territorial judge in Prescott. The charges were vague but serious: conspiracy, theft, moral corruption of decent citizens. "This is horseshit, and you know it," Silas said flatly. "Maybe so." Morrison's grin was predatory. "But it's legal horseshit. Now bring her out." "I'm here." Calla stepped onto the porch, fully dressed, chin high despite the tremor in her voice. She'd pinned her hair back severely, as if preparing for battle. Well, Morrison dismounted, moving closer. The pretty bird's ready to return to her cage. "Don't touch her!" Silas's voice carried lethal promise. "She'll come peacefully, but you don't touch her. Protective of your investment." "Boone?" Morrison laughed. "Don't worry. We'll take good care of her, just like old times." One of the deputies produced shackles, the chains clanking in the still night air. Calla's composure cracked slightly at the sound, her breath catching. "Are those necessary?" Silas asked. "She's not going to run." "Regulations?" Morrison was enjoying himself. Dangerous criminals must be properly secured. Silas watched helplessly as they shackled Calla's wrists, the metal closing around her skin with finality. She kept her eyes on his face, drawing strength from his presence. "I'll get you out," he promised. "I'll hire the best lawyer in the territory. This won't stand." "Touching." Morrison grabbed Calla's arm roughly, ignoring Silas's growl of protest. "But she's got a date with the judge in Prescott. 3 days' ride, plenty of time for her to reconsider her life choices." They put her in a prison wagon they'd brought, the bars casting shadows across her face. As they prepared to leave, Morrison leaned close to Silas. "Should have left well enough alone, Boone. Could have just enjoyed what you bought and kept quiet. But no, you had to parade her around, act like she was respectable." His voice dropped. "She'll pay for your pride. And when she's convicted, and she will be convicted, she'll hang. They're less forgiving in Prescott than Yuma." The convoy rolled away, leaving Silas standing in the yard with a rage burning in his chest. Hang. The word echoed in his mind as he saddled his fastest horse. By dawn, he was riding hard for Prescott, stopping only to rest his mount and send telegrams to every lawyer he knew. Prescott was a proper town, with paved streets and brick buildings that spoke of civilization and order. The territorial courthouse stood like a monument to justice, or injustice, depending on which side of the bars you found yourself. Silas spent 2 days haunting lawyers' offices, spending money he didn't have on consultations and bribes for information. What he learned made his blood run cold. The judge, Harold Fitzgerald, was Morrison's cousin. The charges had been fabricated by a witness who claimed Calla had robbed him in Tucson, a man who turned out to be one of Morrison's poker buddies. "It's a railroad job," Attorney Marcus Webb told him bluntly. "They mean to make an example of her, show what happens to fallen women who try to rise above their station. There must be something we can do. And you can pray the judge has a moment of conscience. Beyond that," Webb shrugged. "I'll represent her, but I won't lie about her chances." The trial was set for the 3rd day. Silas wasn't allowed to see Calla beforehand. Morrison had seen to that. He sat in the packed courtroom, noting with disgust how many had come to gawk at the spectacle. When they brought Calla in, Silas's heart clenched. 3 days in custody had taken their toll. Her dress was wrinkled, her hair disheveled, but worst were her eyes, dull with the resignation of someone who'd been here before. The prosecutor, a thin man with the demeanor of an undertaker, laid out the case with theatrical flair. The witness, clearly coached, spun a tale of being robbed and subjected to unnatural temptations by Calla in Tucson. Other witnesses, all Morrison's associates, testified to her corrupting influence and dangerous nature. Webb did his best, pointing out inconsistencies. The lack of physical evidence, The convenient timing. But Judge Fitzgerald overruled every objection with barely concealed impatience. When it came time for final statements, Webb stood. "Your Honor, I ask you to consider not just the dubious evidence presented, but the character of the accused as she is now. Mrs. Boone has built a respectable life, contributed to her community." "Objection," the prosecutor interrupted. "The defendant's current situation is irrelevant to past crimes." Sustained. Webb sat down, defeated. The judge was already reaching for his gavel when Silas stood. "Your Honor, I request permission to speak." Fitzgerald scowled. "This is highly irregular. Mr. Boone, Silas Boone, the defendant's husband." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The judge's scowl deepened, but curiosity won. "Very well, but be brief." Silas moved to the front of the courtroom, his hat in his hands. He looked at Calla, drawing strength from her surprised gaze, then faced the judge. "Your Honor, I've lived in this territory for 8 years, built my ranch from nothing, buried my first wife in its soil. I know what justice looks like, and this isn't it. Mr. Boone, please, let me finish." Silas's voice carried the quiet authority of truth. "I contracted for a bride through legal channels. The territory sent me Calla. I didn't know her past, didn't care. What I found was a woman who works harder than any hand I've hired, who tends my garden like it's Eden itself, who gentles horses with a touch." He turned to address the packed courtroom. "Yes, she has a past. We all do. But I've watched her these past months, seen her face down those who would shame her with dignity, seen her help neighbors who scorned her, seen her rebuild herself from nothing but determination and hope." His voice grew stronger. "You want to talk about corruption? Let's talk about guards who abuse their power, about deputies who carry grudges and cousins who wear judges' robes, about a system that punishes women for the crimes of surviving." "That's enough." Fitzgerald banged his gavel, but Silas wasn't finished. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I have here a telegram from Territorial Governor Fremont himself, inquiring about this trial. Seems he's very interested in reports of judicial misconduct in Prescott, very interested in why a woman pardoned under his rehabilitation program is being retried on phantom charges." The courtroom erupted. Fitzgerald pounded his gavel futilely as reporters scribbled and spectators shouted. Morrison had gone pale in his seat. "Order! Order!" Fitzgerald finally restored quiet. "Mr. Boone, if you're attempting to threaten this court—" "No threat, Your Honor. Just a reminder that justice has many eyes watching." Silas locked eyes with the judge, including mine. The silence stretched taut. Fitzgerald's jaw worked as he weighed his options. Political ambition warred with family loyalty in his expression. Finally, he spoke through gritted teeth. "After careful consideration of the limited evidence, this court finds insufficient grounds to convict. The defendant is free to go." The gavel fell like thunder. Chaos erupted again. But Silas only had eyes for Calla. She swayed on her feet as the bailiff unlocked her shackles, and he was there to catch her, pulling her against him as the crowd surged around them. "How?" she whispered against his chest. "Telegraph wire runs both ways. Governor remembered your case. Didn't like Morrison's games." He held her tighter. "Let's go home." They pushed through the crowd, ignoring Morrison's venomous glare and the shouted questions from reporters. Outside, Silas lifted her onto his horse and swung up behind her, cradling her against him as they rode out of Prescott. Miles from town, Calla began to shake, then cry, great, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. Silas stopped the horse and held her as she fell apart, murmuring wordless comfort against her hair. "I thought I was going back," she gasped between sobs. "The chains, the cell, I couldn't survive it again. I couldn't." "Shh, you're safe, you're free. No one's taking you anywhere." When her storm passed, they continued toward home. Calla dozed fitfully against his chest, waking periodically with small starts. Each time, he tightened his arms around her, anchoring her to the present. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. The place had never looked more welcoming. Silas helped her down, noting how she clung to him, unwilling to lose physical contact. Inside, she stood in the middle of the main room as if seeing it for the first time. "It's real," she said wonderingly. "I'm really here. You're really here." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You stood up in that courtroom, risked everything. Why? You know why? Say it," she whispered. "Please, I need to hear it." He crossed to her, taking her face gently in his hands. "Because I love you. Because the thought of losing you was worse than any risk. Because you've become my whole world. Calla Boone, and I'll be damned if anyone takes you from it." She kissed him then, fierce and desperate and full of promise. When they broke apart, both were breathless. "Silas," she said against his lips, "take me to bed. Make me forget everything but you." He searched her eyes. "Are you sure? After everything?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She took his hand, placing it over her heart. "I want to be your wife in truth. I want to choose this. Choose you with my whole heart." Later, as they lay entwined in the darkness, Calla traced patterns on his chest. "Morrison won't give up," she said quietly. "He'll find another way. Let him try." Silas pressed a kiss to her forehead. "We'll face whatever comes. Together." "Together," she echoed, the word like a prayer. "I like the sound of that." Outside, a coyote howled at the rising moon, answered by its pack. But inside the small adobe house, two souls who had found each other against all odds held tight to their hard-won peace, knowing that morning would bring new challenges, but no longer afraid to face them. The chains were gone. Not just the physical ones, but the invisible ones that had bound Calla's spirit. In their place was something stronger, the unbreakable bond between two people who had looked into the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light, hand in hand. The weeks following the trial brought an unexpected peace. Word of Silas's stand in the Prescott courtroom had spread through the territory like wildfire, carried by merchants and travelers who embellished the tale with each telling. Morrison had disappeared. Some said to Texas, others to California. But most importantly, he was gone. Calla bloomed in his absence like her garden after rain. She laughed more freely, moved without constantly checking over her shoulder, and threw herself into ranch life with renewed vigor. The green dress she'd worn to the church social had been carefully cleaned and pressed for their upcoming wedding ceremony. One morning, Silas found her in the garden, kneeling among the tomato plants with an odd expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, immediately concerned. She looked up at him, eyes wide with wonder. "Nothing's wrong. I realized I'm happy. Truly happy. I'd forgotten what that felt like." He helped her to her feet, noting the dirt smudges on her cheeks, the way the morning sun caught in her hair. "You deserve to be happy. I'm starting to believe that." She leaned into him, her hand resting on his chest. "Silas, there's something I need to tell you." "About Morrison being gone. Mr. Boone!" They turned to see a rider approaching fast, dust billowing behind him. As he drew closer, Silas recognized young Billy Turner from town, his face flushed with exertion. "Mr. Boone! Mrs. Boone!" Billy panted, sliding from his lathered horse. "Sheriff wants you in town right away. There's a situation." Cold dread settled in Silas's stomach. "What kind of situation?" "There's a woman. Showed up this morning. Half dead. Says she knows Mrs. Boone from before. Sheriff figured you'd want to know." Calla had gone still beside him. "What's her name?" "Rose, I think. Rose something. She's in a bad way. Ma'am, real bad. Rose." Calla's voice cracked. "Oh, God. Rose." They made the ride to town in record time, Calla clinging to Silas on horseback while Billy followed with the wagon. She'd told him about Rose during those quiet evenings when the past crept too close, her only friend in that life. A girl even younger than herself who'd tried to protect her during the worst times. The sheriff met them outside the doctor's office. "She's inside. Doc's done what he can, but—" He shook his head. "She's been asking for you, Mrs. Boone." Inside, the smell of carbolic and copper hung heavy. Rose lay on the examining table, her face nearly unrecognizable beneath the bruises. One arm was splinted, and bandages covered what Silas suspected were knife wounds. "Rose." Calla dropped to her knees beside the table, taking the girl's uninjured hand. "I'm here. You're safe now." Rose's eyes fluttered open. One was swollen shut, but the other focused on Calla with desperate intensity. Knew you'd make it out," she whispered through split lips. "Heard about your rancher. Had to find you. Shh, don't talk. Save your strength." "No!" Rose gripped Calla's hand with surprising force. "Need to warn you, Morrison. He ain't gone. He's coming. Hired men, lots of them. Plans to burn you out, take you back." Silas stepped closer. "When?" "Soon. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow." Rose coughed, specks of blood on her lips. "He did this when I wouldn't tell him which road you took home. But others talked. We'll get you somewhere safe," Calla promised. "The ranch—" "No." Rose's voice was fading. "Too late for me. But you got a chance. You got a good man. Don't let Morrison take that." The doctor appeared at Silas's shoulder, expression grim. He shook his head slightly. Rose saw it too, a sad smile crossing her battered face. "Ain't scared," she whispered. "Just tired. So tired of running." Her gaze found Calla again. "Be happy for both of us. Yeah? Live free. Rose, promise me." "I promise." Calla choked out. "I promise." Rose closed her eyes, her breathing shallow but peaceful. Calla stayed with her, holding her hand and humming old hymns, until the breathing stopped altogether just as the sun reached its zenith. They buried Rose in the town cemetery that afternoon, the sheriff and his wife, the doctor, and several townspeople attending. Calla stood dry-eyed through the service, but Silas could feel the grief radiating from her like heat. "She was 19, Calla said as they walked back to the wagon. 19 years old, and she'd lived more horror than most see in a lifetime. I'm sorry. She died free," Calla said firmly. "That matters. That has to matter." Back at the ranch, they prepared for Morrison's arrival. Silas cleaned and loaded every weapon they owned, while Calla packed their valuables and important papers into saddlebags. "We could run," Silas offered. "Head to California. Start fresh." "No." Calla's jaw set in that stubborn line. "I'm done running. This is our home. Rose died to warn us. I won't dishonor that by fleeing." As darkness fell, Tom Garrett arrived with 3 of his hands. "Heard there might be trouble," he said simply. "Figured you could use some backup." Others came too. The widow Martinez with her 2 grown sons, the blacksmith and his brother, even the schoolteacher with an ancient but well-oiled shotgun. By full dark, a dozen people had gathered to defend the ranch. "Why?" Calla asked the widow, overwhelmed by the support. "Most of you barely know us." "We know enough," the widow replied. "Know you work hard. Keep your word. Help when needed. That makes you neighbors worth protecting." They didn't have long to wait. Just after midnight, riders appeared on the horizon, torches blazing against the stars. Silas counted at least 15 men, Morrison riding at their head like some demented general. "Boone!" Morrison's voice carried across the desert. "Send her out and we'll leave peaceful like. This is between her and me." "The hell it is," Silas called back. "You're trespassing on private property. Turn around while you still can." Morrison's laugh was ugly. "You think your little gathering of shopkeepers and farmers scares me? I've got professional guns here. Boone, men who've killed for less than I'm paying them. Then they can die for it too." Tom Garrett shouted. "First man crosses that fence line gets a bullet." For a moment, the night held its breath. Then Morrison raised his hand, and his men spurred forward with wild yells. The night exploded in gunfire. Silas and the defenders fired from cover, behind water troughs, fence posts, the corners of buildings. Morrison's men, exposed on horseback, made easy targets. 3 went down in the first volley, but they kept coming, and soon the fighting grew desperate. The blacksmith took a bullet in the shoulder. One of the Martinez boys cried out as a shot grazed his leg. Morrison's men reached the outbuildings, setting fire to the hay barn. Through the smoke and chaos, Silas lost sight of Calla. Panic seized him as he searched, firing at shadows, calling her name. Then he saw her, cornered near the chicken coop by Morrison himself, her rifle empty, his gun trained on her heart. Always knew it would come to this. Morrison snarled. You and me, settling accounts, then settle them with me. Silas stepped into the open, his own gun steady. Morrison's eyes flicked between them, calculating. The great Silas Boone, he sneered. You really think she's worth dying for? A used-up whore who— Calla moved. In one fluid motion, she pulled the hidden derringer from her boot, the one Silas had given her as a wedding gift, and fired. Morrison's eyes widened in shock as the small bullet found its mark, blood blooming across his chest. He fell backward, gun slipping from nerveless fingers. Around them, seeing their leader down, Morrison's remaining men broke and fled into the desert night. The defenders sent a few parting shots after them, but didn't pursue. Calla stood over Morrison's body, the derringer shaking in her hand. Silas reached her just as her knees gave out, catching her before she hit the ground. Is it over? She whispered. It's over. The fire in the barn was quickly controlled. The structure saved though damaged. The wounded were tended. None seriously. Thank God. As dawn broke, the neighbors departed with handshakes and promises of future aid if needed. Sheriff Watson arrived mid-morning to collect Morrison's body and take statements. Self-defense, clear as day, he pronounced. Man threatened you on your own property with 12 witnesses. No charges will be filed. After he left, Silas found Calla sitting on Mary's grave hill, looking out over their land. The morning sun painted everything gold, peaceful despite the scorch marks and bullet holes. I've never killed anyone before, she said as he sat beside her. I thought I'd feel guilty. But all I feel is free, finally, truly free. He gave you no choice. No, he didn't. She leaned against him. Rose was right. I have a good man, a good life, worth fighting for, worth killing for, if it comes to that. They sat in silence for a while, watching the ranch come alive with morning activity. The horses needed tending, the garden watering, the damaged barn repairs. Life going on as it always did, as it always would. We still getting married next week? Silas asked eventually. Try and stop me. She turned to kiss him, soft and sweet. Though we might need to patch a few bullet holes in the church wall first. He laughed, the sound carrying across the desert. I love you, Calla Boone. And I love you, Silas Boone, more than I ever thought possible. A week later, they stood before Reverend Davis in the little white church, surrounded by the same neighbors who'd fought beside them. Calla wore the green dress, a crown of desert wildflowers in her hair. Silas had never seen anything more beautiful. Do you, Calla, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for as long as you both shall live? I do, she said firmly, her eyes never leaving Silas's face. With my whole heart, I do. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with fiddle music and dancing and more food than the small community had seen in months. But eventually, the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone under the vast desert sky. No more chains, Calla said softly as they stood on their porch, her wedding ring catching the starlight. No more running, no more fear, just us and this land and whatever future we build. Together, Silas agreed, pulling her close. Together, she echoed, and sealed it with a kiss. Inside the house, on the table where they'd shared so many meals and conversations, lay a simple wooden sign Silas had carved. Calla Boone, free woman. And she was. Finally, blessedly, completely free. The morning sickness came first, catching Calla by surprise as she knelt in the garden. She'd attributed her exhaustion to the hard work of rebuilding after Morrison's attack, but when the nausea persisted for a third week, understanding dawned with the force of revelation. She found Silas in the barn, working with a young colt. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. He was at her side immediately, hands gentle on her arms. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, I think. Silas, I think I'm carrying our child." The curry comb slipped from his fingers, clattering on the hard-packed earth. His eyes searched her face, wonder dawning in their depths. "A baby?" "The doctor can confirm, but I'm almost certain." She placed his hand over her still flat stomach. Is this welcome news?" For answer, he swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. "Welcome, Calla. This is everything I never dared hope for." Dr. Patterson confirmed her suspicion the next day, estimating she was about 2 months along. "You're healthy," he assured them. "Both of you, just take care, eat well, and rest when you need to." The news spread through their small community like wildfire. The widow Martinez arrived with a basket of baby clothes saved from her own children. Tom Garrett's wife brought preserves and advice. Even the stern Mrs. Henderson from the general store softened, sharing remedies for morning sickness. "It's like the baby has given us respectability," Calla marveled one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of copper. "Suddenly, I'm not the former convict. I'm an expectant mother." "You were always respectable," Silas said firmly. "They're just finally seeing it." As her pregnancy progressed, Calla threw herself into preparing for the baby with the same determination she'd brought to the garden. She sewed tiny clothes from fabric scraps, arranged and rearranged the small room that would serve as a nursery, and read every book on child-rearing the lending library could provide. But at night, when the desert wind rattled the windows, Silas would sometimes wake to find her standing at the window, one hand on her growing belly, staring out at the darkness. "What if I'm like them?" she whispered one night when he joined her. "My parents died when I was young, but what if there was something wrong with them, something that made them unable to care for me properly? What if it's in my blood?" "You're nothing like whatever you're imagining," he said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I've seen you with the animals, gentle and patient. I've seen you nurture life from barren soil. You'll be a wonderful mother. I want to believe that." She leaned back against him. "This child will never know hunger or fear or shame. I swear it." The months passed with the rhythm of ranch life. Calla modified her activities as her condition advanced, but refused to be idle. She could often be found in the expanded garden, talking to both plants and baby as she worked. The ranch prospered under their combined care, the horse breeding program beginning to attract buyers from as far as Colorado. One afternoon in her 7th month, an unexpected visitor arrived. Calla was resting on the porch when the lone rider approached, and something about the set of his shoulders made her call for Silas. The man who dismounted was perhaps 40, well-dressed but travel-worn. He removed his hat, revealing sandy hair shot with gray. "Mrs. Boone, my name is Theodore Marshall. I believe you knew my daughter, Rose." Calla's hand went to her throat. "Rose's father?" "Yes." His eyes, she saw, were the same warm brown as Rose's had been. "I've been searching for her for 3 years, ever since she disappeared. I only recently learned." "Learned what happened?" "Please, sit down," Silas said, guiding the man to a chair. "Can we get you some water?" As they sat together on the porch, Theodore Marshall's story unfolded. A widower who'd lost his wife in childbirth. He'd raised Rose alone until fever took him down for months. When he recovered, his daughter had vanished. The house sold for debts. Neighbors telling him she'd gone to the bad. "I searched everywhere," he said, tears running unchecked down his weathered face. "Mining camps, cattle towns, anywhere I heard she might be. I never stopped looking, never stopped hoping." "She spoke of you," Calla said gently. Said you were a good man, that the fever wasn't your fault. But I failed her. When she needed me most, I wasn't there. You were ill, Silas said firmly, not absent by choice. Theodore pulled out a worn photograph, Rose as a young girl, smiling in a Sunday dress. Did she suffer greatly? Calla chose her words carefully. She survived with courage and dignity. She had friends who cared for her, and at the end, she died free, warning us of danger. She died a hero. Would you show me where she's buried? They took him to the cemetery as the sun began its descent. Theodore knelt by the simple marker, his shoulders shaking with long-suppressed grief. Calla and Silas stood back, giving him privacy for his farewell. Before he left, Theodore pressed a leather pouch into Calla's hands. For the baby, he said. Rose would have wanted. She always loved children. Said if she ever got free, she'd have a dozen. The pouch contained more money than Calla had ever seen, enough to secure their child's future education and more. They tried to refuse, but Theodore was adamant. Let me do this one thing for my daughter, he pleaded. Let her memory be part of giving a child the chances she never had. After he rode away, Calla wept in Silas's arms, for Rose, for Theodore, for all the broken families and lost chances. But when the tears passed, she felt something lift from her shoulders, as if Rose's spirit had found peace at last. The baby came with the first cool winds of autumn, after a labor that tested Calla's endurance, but not her determination. When the doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, she looked down at the tiny face with awe. A daughter, Dr. Patterson announced, healthy and strong. Rose, Calla said immediately. Her name is Rose, Rose Mary Boone. Silas, who'd paced through every hour of labor like a caged cougar, approached the bed with reverence when Calla placed their daughter in his arms. His face transformed with a joy so pure it took her breath away. She's perfect, he whispered. Look at her. Calla, we made this miracle. The baby opened her eyes, startling blue like a desert morning, and seemed to study her father with ancient wisdom. Then she yawned, tiny fist waving, and both parents laughed through their tears. The community embraced little Rose as one of their own. The widow Martinez became an honorary grandmother, dispensing advice and cookies in equal measure. Tom Garrett carved a beautiful cradle from mesquite wood, even crusty misses. Henderson knitted blankets. But it was watching Calla with their daughter that filled Silas's heart to overflowing. She was everything she'd feared she couldn't be, patient, loving, fiercely protective. She sang lullabies half-remembered from childhood, made up stories about brave girls who rode wild horses and grew magical gardens. One evening when Rose was 3 months old, Silas found wife and daughter in the garden. Calla sat among the bean rows, the baby on a blanket beside her, both watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. What are you thinking? He asked, settling beside them. That I understand now, Calla said softly. Why you took those chains off with shaking hands. Why you gave me shelter when you had every reason to turn away. Love makes us brave enough to hope, even when hope seems foolish. It wasn't foolish, he said, gathering both his girls into his arms. It was the smartest thing I ever did. Baby Rose gurgled, reaching for her mother's face with chubby fingers. Calla caught the little hand, kissing each tiny fingertip. She'll never know chains, she murmured. Never know shame or hunger or the weight of other people's sins. She'll grow up free under this endless sky, knowing only love. Yes, Silas agreed. She will. As if in agreement, a mockingbird began its evening song from the garden fence, the same spot where one had sung the day Calla first smiled. The desert stretched endlessly around them, harsh and beautiful and full of promise. Inside the house, above the mantel, hung the wooden sign Silas had carved. Calla Boone, free woman. Beside it now hung another, smaller sign. Rose Mary Boone, born free. The journal Calla had started months ago lay open on the kitchen table, her careful handwriting filling the pages. The final entry, written that morning, read, My daughter sleeps beside me as I write. her breath sweet as spring rain. Through the window, I can see Silas working with the horses, strong and steady as the mountains. This life I never dared dream of surrounds me. Love, purpose, belonging. The chains are so far behind me now I can barely remember their weight. Sometimes I think of that woman who arrived here in shackles, wild-eyed and broken. I want to tell her, hold on, dawn is coming. The very things that seem like endings, the arrests, the sentences, the shame, are really beginnings in disguise. Every chain that falls away makes room for something beautiful to grow. If someone reads this years from now, know this: we are more than our worst moments. We are more than what others name us. We are the choices we make each day to survive, to hope, to love despite the odds. We are the gardens we grow in impossible soil. I am Calaboon. I was a prisoner. I was a mail-order bride. I was scared and angry and certain I deserved nothing good. Now I am a wife, a mother, a neighbor, a friend. I am free. And that freedom was worth every terrible step that brought me here. The desert blooms after the harshest storms. So do we. The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside the little adobe house, a family prepared for evening. Simple food, quiet conversation. The sweet weight of a sleeping child passed between loving arms. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and possibility, whispering of all the tomorrows yet to come. In this harsh and beautiful land, two souls had found each other against impossible odds. They had fought for their love, bled for their freedom, and built something enduring from the ashes of their pasts. The mail-order bride had arrived in chains, but she lived now unfettered, her heart as vast and free as the western sky. And in the garden, despite the approaching winter, the roses bloomed wild and sweet, a testament to what can grow when love tends the soil. Thank you all for listening to this tale from the Old West. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying these stories, whether it's on your commute, during a quiet evening at home, or perhaps around your own campfire. Please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reflections make our campfire circle complete. Until next time, partners.